Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar event, Workplace Wellbeing Strategies to help you build high-performing, resilient legal teams. I am Jamie Gassman, Vice President of Marketing for R3 Continuum, and joining me in this conversation is my colleague, Dr. George Vergolius, R3's Chief Clinical Officer. Hey, George.
Hey, Jamie. Great to be here and really excited to talk about a very valid topic that we should be addressing.
I'm very excited too. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a little introduction. So the job of a law firm administrator has gotten a lot harder. I'm sure a lot of you on the call would agree. Along with the focus on client retention, obtaining new business, and the amount of billable hours your firm is producing to drive revenue, you are also having to ensure you're providing a comprehensive well-being program to support the mental health and performance needs of your people. Well, today's webinar will help make that task easier. We will be discussing impactful ways you can support the unique needs of your team while ensuring the business performance is maintained. So, George, diving into our first question, from your clinical background with the work you've done in the legal space so far to date, what are some of the growing trends that you've seen with regard to balancing employee well-being and business profits in the legal space?
Yeah, that is a great question to start with. And I appreciate how you're reflecting the balance needed of well-being initiatives, right? How do we take care of ourselves and those around us in that workspace with profits? And a lot of times in the well-being space, traditionally it's about, mindfulness and meditation and yoga, and those are wonderful things. I practice two of those today. I did not practice yoga because I have no flexibility, but what's interesting is it's not often tied to discussions of profits or bottom line. It seems like that's taboo. But what we find when we do a lot of consultations with big organizations, with law firms, is at the end of the day, while we do want to take care of people, while leaders do want to take care of people, themselves and others, it also has to continue to advance the business interests of the company, or in this case, of the law firm itself. So it has to have some relevance to the bottom line. So what we have found is a win-win scenario is in helping others, they feel more integrated, they feel more balanced, they're thinking more clearly, they're actually able to focus better, they're able to be more productive, they're able to engage in more innovative teamwork and collaboration, both with colleagues and with clients. All of that translates to a more efficient and better working business unit, or in this case, a better working law firm. And that helps the bottom line. So that's one of the big trends we're seeing, is that groups or organizations, in particular law firms, are starting to see that both of those can be met, and those can be set up in a win-win scenario.
So from conversations that I've had with law firm leaders and discussing, that the stigma around behavioral health, or the perceived stigma around needing, around talking about mental health or needing well-being solutions, especially in this particular profession, and how it, could be seen as, potentially weak, or, some of those other concerns that law firm professionals have. How is that evolving? Because there's so much talk about well-being in the legal space. Do you see that stigma or that perceived stigma coming down, or is it shifting in any direction? What are you seeing from that?
Yeah, we're seeing two, I in particular, but we as a group, meaning R3 and my colleagues, the others I work with on a daily basis, we're seeing two things occur in that space. One is more generic, or kind of impacting the zeitgeist, if you will, if we can use that term. And that is going into COVID. COVID forced us all to slow down. And one of the toughest things about taking care of ourselves is you just got to hit the pause button. You got to force yourself to hit the pause button. And that can be really hard where you are in a high test, high performance industry, such as law, especially not all aspects of law, but there's a lot of aspects in law where it is high test, it is high performance, it is high expectations. You have to deliver, and you have to deliver within a time frame, because, court dates and judges don't like to wait if they're expecting to go forward on things. So that's very demanding. Well, what COVID did, it shut down the whole system. It forced us to kind of go inward and just reflect and have some time. And many of us did different things with that time. But coming out of it, what it also forced us to do is take a look back and say, I kind of like that shutdown emotionally, psychologically. I was able to see things and experience things and gain insights that I never would have experienced if I stayed on the treadmill, right? And coming then forward from there, many people, certainly in corporate business around the world, not just in the States, said, I'm not willing to go fully back to that treadmill mentality that I used to have. I want more work-life integration, or what some people call work-life balance. So that's what happened at the general level. What I think also began and is continuing to happen in the legal space is the after effects of what I just described. You even have your middle and senior talent who have been there for many years saying, I need to find a recalibration. But they're also bringing in younger talent, millennials, and especially Gen Z, that are on kind of a runway to be middle managers and eventually even senior managers and partners, right? And there's generational differences. What we know about Gen Z and millennials in particular, especially younger and middle level millennials, is they want a sense of purpose and meaning from their work. They want to feel like they can bring their whole self to the workplace and feel heard and understood. They want to feel that they have a sense of purpose. They want to feel that they have a good relationship to their manager, and their manager is helping mentor them on their professional career, not just in the job. And two other things that are critical, they also want to feel that they are thriving at the workplace, not that it's only a job, but they're actually thriving, and that they're not afraid to move. Unlike, I'm 55. So unlike the way I came up in my early career, I was told, oh, you need to stay somewhere 5 years minimum if you want to move up eventually in corporate America. Well, now this younger talent, they have no problem. And the market is reinforcing this. There's no problem of them moving around. And so they're operating out of something that I adopted mid-career, which is I say to myself, if I'm not loving and learning, I'm leaving. If I don't love what I'm doing and I'm not growing, I'm looking to leave at some point, or because now I'm stagnant. And I think we have a whole group of young, talented workers across many industries that are kind of living by that ethos. And that means managers have to really figure out, how do we create spaces in which they can thrive, that we can give them the help and support they need, and in a way, though, that they can continue to fit the needs of the company or the firm and grow it forward. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, and so talking about that workforce,
Yeah.
looking at what they're looking for, and they're asking for the well-being programs. We think of these traditional well-being programs that you and I in our careers kind of grew up with as just the standard EAPs. Typically was all that workplaces offered, and now you've got so many different apps and other programs out there. And even for like attorneys themselves, they have the LAPS group. What should legal managers be considering when they're looking at that primary support that they need to provide to their people? How do they make sure that they've got that right balance of well-being support and professional development support for their law firms today and for their employees?
Yeah, this is another critical question, and one that we see a number of firms get a little bit sideways with initially when they don't fully understand their culture. And that's the first part of it. Understanding what are your culture's needs and what is the nature of your culture. And sometimes I describe it this way. And I've worked with all kinds of different law firms in terms of industry or focus, as well as personality. Are you more of a hunter-gatherer type? Are you more of the hunters, right? In terms of the energy level, in terms of the mindset, and in terms of the degree of support and flexibility you're willing or able, not always willing, even just able to afford, other groups, or other people in the organization. So it's important to understand your culture and then define what are the outcomes. So I always like asking at the front end, if you implemented a well-being or mental health well-being program for 6 months, a year, 18 months, and you're the leader of that firm, what do you want to see in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? And there's no really wrong answer there. We've literally had people say, I want to see increased performance. I want to see increased teamwork and collaboration. I want to see increased innovation. I want to see an increase in the talent that we attract from other firms, right? Because people look at us and say, I want to go work there. They really
Mhm.
seem like they're getting a lot done, but they're also taking care of their people. We had one group that literally said, I want to see measurements of happiness go up. Because to them, that was a measurement of all kinds of other cascading things that tap into well-being and thriving. So the key is, what are the outcomes you want to drive towards? And then from there, you begin to build out from a menu the services that could fit that. And then I'll list some of those quickly. And then Jamie, feel free to ask me additional questions if you'd like. So one is performance coaching or executive coaching, I think, and some of these coaching terms can be interchanged. There are some nuances, but for the sake of today's discussion, I'm using them kind of interchangeably, where you're coaching someone on barriers that are getting in the way currently that they want to overcome to continue to thrive or to improve their bounce back from adversity, right? Um, Mental health wellness counseling. This would be situations in which somebody is dealing with a mental health issue or mental health symptoms, and they really need to kind of address that because that is getting in the way of them optimally performing. Various types of training. And that could be training on mindfulness, training on time management. It could be training on managing our own internal negative dialogue. There's a number of training topics that we can be built in around that. Managing conflict, we get a lot in the legal space. How do you manage conflict? How do you have difficult conversations, not just with colleagues, but oftentimes with clients, right? And how do you kind of turn that conversation around in a positive direction so you can get to win-win? Part of that's negotiation, but part of that is also understanding the underpinnings of anger and frustration and hostility and using that to one's advantage. And then we do roundtables as well. So we will do trainings or we will do small group discussions around a given topic that has to do with thriving or performance management. And then we will do regular roundtables, which are once a week, once every few weeks, or once a month, different frequencies. And we will talk about what tools and techniques did you implement? What barriers did you hit? And how do we as a group, maybe 5, 6, 7 people, how do we begin to overcome those and kind of move forward and continue to grow? So there's a number of different things that you can do with that. The key is understanding your culture and then understanding your intended outcomes and then catering those services or those offerings towards those outcomes and what you want to see happen.
Those are all such great solutions to share with the audience. One question I had, and it kind of relates to kind of an area that R3 does really well and is very much known for. When you look at trauma and these law firms with some of the, whether it's somebody within the law firm itself, because these, law firms can be quite intimate groups. I mean, they work, they're generally, maybe it's a smaller team. They're all working together for the same goals. And let's say you lose a colleague in that setting, or you lose a client that you've worked with for a long time, or just, something's happened in the area of which that office is located that they might be officed within. How can they support their team following maybe a trauma or a disruption in the workplace that is impacting their ability to move forward or to maintain productivity?
Yeah, indeed. And that's way more common than I think many of us assume that don't work in or around the legal space. And as a forensic psychologist, I've been working in and around legal for, since the onset of my career, some 25 years ago. What's one of the things that we often employ, probably the most to address that issue, is disruptive event management. And we can do that at a large scale, large group format. We can also do it at an individual format. And what we're doing is we're coming in and we're talking with organizational leaders, but also individuals. It's a voluntary thing. We have boots on the ground within 24, 48, 72 hours, oftentimes even within half a day, to help people process the event and really help people tap into their natural resources that they have already to kind of build up their emotional resilience and kind of get their feet under them emotionally. And sometimes that's normalizing the event, normalizing their reaction to the event, helping them understand what is acute trauma reaction and what is reasonable for them to expect and what is reasonable to expect of you're going to bounce back from this after a little while. Because until we're exposed to something like those types of events you mentioned, many of us, unless we work in the field, we don't have an understanding of what's that like and what can we expect and what's reasonable. And then by doing that in a group format as well as an individual format for those that want more of an individual discussion. And by the way, as a quick aside, the individual discussion can be very useful, particularly when people have had prior experiences and the recent experiences is triggering the prior experiences. That might be something somebody doesn't want to talk about in a group setting. So we do offer the one-on-one engagement as well. But what's nice is by doing that across an organization and also doing that with leadership and then educating leadership about the process, it creates a larger environment where everyone has a deeper sense that we're all going to respond to these things differently. Some of us are going to be irritable, a little more angry. Some of us are going to be withdrawn. Some of us are going to take a week to bounce back. Others might take 3 weeks or longer. And there's different, relations to that. For the organization that doesn't do that, that doesn't have the benefit of the service that we're talking about, DEM, and they don't, initiate that or get that in place, what you often find is a few weeks down the road, you might have 10 people in your office that are responding 5, 6, 7 different ways. And people end up invariably judging others, right? What's going on with George? Why is he being such a jerk? Well, George dealt with this 10 years ago at a prior workplace, maybe. Or why is Jamie suddenly just so disengaged? Why is she quiet quitting? Jamie's not quiet quitting. Jamie is out of emotional survival. She's kind of retreating back a little bit emotionally to focus a lot of her internal resources on managing the trauma she just experienced a week ago. And it's going to take her a few weeks to kind of get back to the old Jamie that we all know. In the absence of a service that can educate and guide and provide some intervention with this, people are just speculating about each other, and that creates additional division. So again, there's a lot of things with the DEM intervention that can be very beneficial.
Yeah. So, looking at the other solutions mentioned, talking through DEM, which you just shared, it sounds like more and more well-being programs need to be intentional, comprehensive, but also very much proactive, having them in place ahead of time. Can you talk a little bit more about why a proactive approach in ensuring that you've got these solutions kind of at the ready or available, before, an acute situation happens is so much more, or is so important, but also how it can be more effective in your well-being program being, achieving the goals and results that you're seeking?
Yeah, that's a question we try to instill wisdom on a lot at the early stage of working with clients. What is nice about talking about this a little bit more geared towards the legal profession is most lawyers understand that if I were to flip it and say, why do you prepare for trial? Why don't you just go in and wing it? Why don't you just wait till opposing counsel throws some new piece of evidence at you and just deal with it when you first hear about it in front of the judge? I would be laughed out of the room, right? Well, by being proactive, having a plan in place, having an understanding of what is your culture, what are the outcomes you want to drive towards in terms of how you want to respond to adverse events that impact the firm. How do you want your people to respond? That allows you to have a game plan in place, and it allows you to execute on that plan much more quickly. Another thing that we know from disruptive events and traumatic events, and let me quickly make a distinction there. Not every event that is disruptive in the workplace is traumatic to everybody. There was a situation not very long ago where an executive of a company, while giving a training at a very high level, high rise, I want to say it was in New York, but I might be mistaken. Some of you on the webinar today might know this. He wanted to demonstrate how strong the window was. And he literally ran up and he threw himself against the window, and the window shattered and he fell 18 or so stories to his death. That, by almost any measure, we would say is pretty traumatic. And I don't know the numbers, let's say there were 10 people in that room. There's some people that literally will have a traumatic reaction to that. There are other people that are going to be emotionally upset, but aren't necessarily viewing it as traumatic. And there are some people that, while still affected, are going to be affected. They're going to be able to brush it off a lot more quickly for any number of reasons, their own personal makeup, maybe they've been in therapy before, whatever it may be. And so it's important to realize that in any given culture to any given event, you're going to have various reactions. So having a plan in place and thinking ahead about how are we going to handle this? What is our messaging going to be? What resources do we have in place that we can quickly mobilize? And the key is by quickly mobilizing them, we can help stem away from people falling into a much deeper traumatic response. We know from some of the research that when people have early intervention within 24 to 48 hours after a disruptive or traumatic event, it significantly decreases the chance that they're going to show an entrenched trauma reaction over the next 14, 30, and 45 days. So that's why getting DEM or something like that in place quickly can be very helpful. Having a plan to do so and being proactive about it allows you to execute on that effectively and quickly.
And that proactivity, kind of similar to what you just described, when there's been an incident that's taken place, we all handle stress and burnout differently too, in terms of our day to day. So that proactivity with like a mental wellness counseling solution, or even performance coaching, being able to catch things before they've gone down the track too far.
Yes.
What have you seen in terms of that? Like, how does it relate to some of that more kind of day to day types of stress and anxiety that most are dealing with in their professional careers, or just life in general?
Yeah, no, that's a really important way of framing it. And I want to answer that by making a distinction between between mental well-being counseling or mental wellness counseling, which is a therapeutic intervention, and coaching. And again, there's performance coaching and there's other terms you sometimes will hear, executive coaching and so on. And here's the metaphor I like to use. You're driving down the road, you get a flat tire. None of us, I'm venturing, I rarely as a forensic psychologist say always or never. I'm willing to say never have any of us walked 1 or 2 miles back down the road to figure out what caused the flat tire, right? The goal is, let me fix the flat tire and let me get back on the road. Coaching is kind of like that. What's going on at the present moment? What are the barriers to me continuing to move down the road in the direction I want to travel and at the speed I want to travel? How do I fix that and get back on track, right? Now, let's say you're driving down the road and every 2 days you keep getting a flat tire. And that's happened now 5 times in a row. It keeps happening. It's a repetitive thing that keeps coming up. So there's some past there. Therapy goes a little more into the past to understand the underpinnings of why does this keep happening? Why does this pattern of thoughts and feelings and relationship patterns keep repeating in your life? And let's understand that. And in some cases, maybe we got to go back to the relationship I was in a year ago. And in some cases, maybe I got to go back 45 years to when I was 10 years old and something happened, right? But that's kind of the difference there, right? Again, it's kind of a layperson's way of looking at it. Both are very important and both are very needed at different times. Of course, the other thing with a therapeutic intervention is you're actually having clinical symptoms, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, or other related issues, right? So you're treating an actual mental health condition. But those are different ways to kind of think about it from a solution-oriented angle. And I think what's important to think about as well is different people in the course of their career may need both interventions over time. There have been times in my history that I've been in therapy, and there have been a number of times off and on that I've had different coaches, right? Weight loss coaches, I've had productivity coaches, I've had mentors and career or executive coaches at times as well. So if you think of those as different tools in a toolbox that we all have access to, that's kind of a more productive way to think about it. And then you pull those out when you need them at different stages of your life and your career.
Love those analogies. We can all relate to that.
Yeah.
I actually had my first flat tire a year ago.
Well, yeah, I don't want to trigger that for you. Hopefully that doesn't happen anymore.
Right. So, let's dive into performance coaching a little bit, because I think a lot of the times when people think of well-being, they automatically go to kind of like that mental health kind of space. And, when you're looking at, making sure that you've got, some of these mental well-being types of solutions available. But let's talk about, how performance coaching is a part of that. And can you dive into a little bit? What is the benefit to that law firm by incorporating some type of a performance coaching or executive coaching type solution for their organization and for their professionals?
Yeah. One of the benefits that's most immediate is it tends to be, it's very focused on outcomes, right? Let's get outcomes. Let's get measurable. Not that therapy is not, right? But therapy at times, given the complexities of the issues and the duration of how long someone struggled with a clinical issue, it could get murky, and sometimes there's some back and forth. Coaching tends to be, what are the outcomes we're driving for? What goals do we have for you as a client? And let's tenaciously and relentlessly focus on those goals to get there as fast as we can. Not any sooner than we need to, but as fast as we can. And so it really is geared towards performance and delivery of improvement over time, whether it's public speaking, whether it's developing confidence, whether it's combating imposter syndrome, time management, something I historically have struggled with, right? And full disclosure, I have ADHD. I didn't know that as a child because we had not invented that disorder yet when I was a child. So it kind of came online when I was a little bit older. But the funny thing is that these are all different skill sets that none of us, and again, I'm going to say that none of us, well, almost none of us, unless your father was Dr. Phil or Oprah, when we were 8 years old, our parents didn't sit us down and say, listen, when you're angry, this is how you appropriately handle emotions. Like there's more of that now because we are a more emotionally and psychologically literate culture. But 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, you learned a lot of that just naturally or over time by working through a bunch of not so great relationships, right? You learn from that. And maybe you had a therapist or a mentor or a coach along the way. So it's important that we have those in place. And what coaching does is it allows us to be driven towards those goals and stay focused on them. And that's what a coach does. It helps that he or she helps us stay accountable and helps us stay focused on the things that we need to do, including getting barriers out of the way.
Great. So looking at performance coaching, mental well-being or counseling, yoga, various calming apps, EAPs, LAPs, or LAPs. How is implementing kind of this robust mental well-being program contribute to the overall performance? How do you measure the success of that? How do you make sure that there's an ROI or there's a VOI in helping to, improve that law firm success, and contribute to that kind of the bottom line, if you will, the revenue coming in the door? How does it help to do that?
Sure. And what I'd like to do if I can is I'd like to talk a little bit about that structurally, very quickly, right? Kind of what we see in the evolution of programs, particularly in the legal space, and then talk about outcomes or KPIs, right? That I would recommend that you consider as you're designing a program or that you're adding to the program over time. So one of the things that we see naturally, and there's many ways you can describe this, this is my own experience doing this for many years, is starting out with a phase of awareness, right? Just the firm is aware they have a problem. Most law firms, most companies, I would say, but certainly most law firms are aware of the burnout problem in the legal profession. And again, my points about COVID and how COVID opened our eyes and generational differences has heightened that awareness, but most are aware there is a problem and we need to probably figure this out before too long. The next stage is adoption, adopting a commitment to do something or adopting a program or adopting, engaging with consultants like me, like R3 around what do we want to do about it, right? And that level of adoption varies across, I would say in my general experience, and this is really anecdotal, but maybe 1/3 of the organizations that I work with, legal firms, I should say, are at the adoption or further stage. Most are at the awareness stage, and some are still trying to figure out, okay, what do we want to do? What do we want to adopt as the beginning of a solution? Next comes integration. And integration is where you start looking at different solutions. We talked about a number of them today, right? And remember, it's a toolbox. It's not just a hammer or a screwdriver. It's a whole toolbox. Um, and then figuring out how they integrate those tools, that awareness, destigma campaigns, and so on. How do they actually integrate that into the organicity of their firm? And that takes time. That takes time. That takes cultural adjustment. It takes buy-in at multiple levels of the organization, particularly with leadership on down. But integrating that, how do you integrate that into your hiring practices? How do you integrate that into your performance reviews? How do you integrate that into situations where a legal professional messes up? And we're all human. We do mess up, right? Do you hit them with a stick, or do you have a more wholesome approach to first seeking understanding before you seek judgment, right? That's the integration phase. Then what happens after a while of that is the synergy phase. And the synergy is where things kind of organically and naturally start working together, right? This is where when HR or other leaders in the firm who are interviewing candidates to join the firm are not only thinking of all the other questions you've always thought of, but you're also gauging the person's well-being. You're gauging the person's flexibility and openness to growth. You're gauging their growth mindset in ways that you wouldn't have done before implementing this program, right? And then ongoing execution and thriving is the last kind of stage, is you're continuing to educate and execute on these programs, and it kind of becomes a flywheel where these things then start influencing each other. And you've gotten there when you have really good talent coming in the door and saying, one of the reasons I chose, Jamie and George Associates is because we heard how well you take care of your people. Damn, that's pretty cool when you can get there, right? Because now there's buzz on the street, there's buzz in the legal community. So that's kind of structurally what the stages that companies go through. If you're looking at this and you're saying, we're barely at awareness, don't get discouraged. Many, many, many firms that we're working at are at awareness and adoption, and that's okay, right? If you go back to pre-COVID, the majority of companies weren't even thinking of this stuff, right? And if they were giving a lot of it lip service. So again, there were still really good models out there, but COVID accelerated all of this, and we're still learning and growing. So let me quickly mention the KPIs because I feel like I'm going on and on, right? The first I would think about is measuring what I call SUE, satisfaction, utilization, and engagement. How satisfied are your people with the program or the service? How often are they utilizing it? Over time, you want them flocking to it more and more. Mm-hmm. And how engaged are they, right? Are they just showing up because they think they need to, or are they really engaged in the process? Different ways you can measure those. Performance indicators. How well are they doing on the job, right? Is their performance increasing? Clinical indicators. So for the clinical side of on the wellness counseling side, is someone's anxiety, depression, substance abuse, overeating, undereating, whatever it may be, are those clinical indicators improving? Functional indicators. And what I mean by that is things that, remember we talked at the beginning of the hour here around what does your company take important? What is important to your firm, right? Is it happiness? Is it collaboration? Is it innovation? All of those are functional indicators, right? Showing up on time, presenting well, presenting with confidence, whatever functional indicators you guys identify as being important, that's what we would put in that bucket. I also like the work-life integration one. And I don't, by the way, you'll notice I'm not saying work-life balance because to me, it's never a balance. There's some weeks that I'm giving 80% to my job and 20% to my personal life, and I feel okay with that. There's other times I take a little more liberty to my personal life, and I'm okay with that. The key is it working for me? And do I feel it's integrated? Just like in a relationship, it's never 50-50, right? So sometimes someone's at an 80 and the other person is only at 20%. That's all they can give. Brene Brown gives a wonderful talk on this if you follow her. And then lastly is a whole series of VOI, right? Value on return or value on investment, things that can be managed. I said a few. Happiness also is fulfillment, sense of purpose, sense of meaning, contribution. We had one firm that talked to us and they loved the idea. They wanted people's feeling of contribution to increase over 6 months. I love that. Especially that's important. I'm not saying it's not important for women. I think it's important for successful people. It's also particularly important, I think, for men of wanting to feel I could still contribute. So these are other variables that you may want to think about measuring. What I will say is don't, what's the old saying? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. If you're going to start measuring these, pick 3 or 4 and measure them well and consistently for a while. And then over time, as the program matures, think about adding other indices in that you can track.
Yeah, those are all such great examples. So those listening in are probably going, wow, okay, that's a lot, but
It is a lot.
understandable, right? So what's that first step? Like, what's the first step of action one should take? Let's just say they have not started anything, but maybe have the EAP program that's available, which is typically standard in most organizations. What's the first step? How do they get started? I know the whole, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time, but if
Right.
you were going to direct somebody to kind of that first impactful moment of this is where you begin and then you add on to it, or you kind of, it's like if you're telling somebody to go run a marathon, what's that first workout they need to do to get started?
Yeah. I love the image of a marathon because for most of us who don't know much about running, because that's also an assumption I'm making, we're just not going to go run like Forrest Gump did in the movie, right? Like it just doesn't work that way.
Right.
The first thing we're going to do is research, okay, how do you train for a marathon? What do you do? What's the first steps? Some of us will hire a coach. So one of the things I recommend is start with awareness, start with some deep questions about your culture, what you want to see change. Get a snapshot of where things are today. What do you want to see differently in your particular culture, in your firm a year from now? And then at some point, some of you may have internal resources. You may have a well-being officer. You may have a well-being director. You may have an internal executive or professional or performance coach. Of course, use those resources maybe to build out and shape a more robust program. But I also highly advise talk to professionals that do this at scale time and time again, consultants, frankly, like us. I mean, this is what we do. And help build out what do you guys want to accomplish with that program. And then from there, once you have those things identified, then you begin to figure out how do we do this? What services do we add? I'll give you 2 quick examples. 2 very similar firms, similar sizes. I would say they're about mid-size for the US. So not gigantic, but not super small or mom and pop, as you say. One of them had a serious problem with burnout to the degree people were well into burnout. They were depressed. They were having massive anxiety. They couldn't sleep. Several people were beginning to abuse substances. A couple of people had various indications of eating issues. One was overeating. One was showing a reexistence of her early college eating disorder, right? They clearly needed a fairly strong clinical presence. They had a number of fairly strong clinical issues, and leadership was aware of this. There was another very similar in size and even similar in terms of industry, unique legal industry. They really didn't have that. What they had a lot of were imposter syndrome, insecurity about public speaking, difficulty collaborating, feeling that they weren't being recognized enough in their career or advancing quickly enough, then feeling insecure in meetings and coming across as a bit hostile and defensive, right? These weren't mental health issues per se. These were coaching issues. And so what we decided is we think, given this dialogue and the discovery process, you guys need a little more coaching to start with. And then what we offered is individualized therapeutic interventions when that was needed. On the first company, it was, I really think you guys need some individual mental health counseling, wellness, well-being counseling, and maybe some coaching on a one-on-one as needed basis, as well as some mental health training and awareness across the firm as a whole, including offering maybe psychological first aid training as an example. Similar firms on paper, but their cultures are very different. And they initially had some very different problems to solve. And that only came from that discovery phase of really taking a close look in the mirror, figuring out what is our culture like today? Where do we want that culture to be in a year from now?
Such great reminders. We're all workplaces are so unique,
Yes.
in terms of like the different challenges or, experiences or, just in general, just even the faces that are within those workplaces are
Yeah.
so unique that you really do need a unique and individualized approach for
Yeah.
that particular culture. So
Jamie,
glad you shared that.
there's one other thing I want to add that I think is really important. Get that input at all levels. You definitely want to get it from, and I mean no disrespect, the worker bees, the folks that are either lower on the chain, if you will. You definitely want to understand what they're going through, but you also have to get input, and eventually you just have to get buy-in from a critical sliver of the leadership.
Mhm.
Because if you implement a program and leadership doesn't have buy-in, and it clearly looks like they're not in support, or they're just doing it because they have to, they feel like maybe it's politically correct or some other pressure, you tend to get people that will pull out of the program. And eventually, I think they pull out of the firm, especially if it's the kind of support that they feel that they want or they need. So you want to get buy-in at all levels, especially buy-in from the top, but also you want to canvas the entire organization so you can understand different pain points. Because one other thing I didn't say is for firms that are mid to larger size, there are different aspects of the firm or even levels of the firm where we might say people in that middle kind of stakeholder or middle range are actually now going from burnout to actual mental health concerns. People above them are not struggling with mental health issues per se. They're really struggling with performance related coaching issues and breaking through to the partner level. So we might emphasize different tools in the toolbox based on those different levels in the organization because they're experiencing different pain points. So something to
Right.
think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are going to narrow all the great, insights you provided today into one piece of advice for the audience to leave with, what would that piece of advice be?
That is a tough one, but I will give you an answer. um, you have to start somewhere, and it sounds so cliche, right? A trip of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. You have to start somewhere. What I am clear about, and there's some really clear um, employment data that supports this statement I'm about to make, um, especially in the legal industry, is if you're not taking care of your people exponentially year after year from now well into the 2030s, you're going to be losing talent. And you're going to be losing investment of people that come on board. You invest like crazy into their development, into their knowledge base, into bringing them up so they can make junior partner and eventually, hopefully, senior partner and carry on the torch. And in 3 or 4 years, they're going to be burned out to the max and they're going to move on. And it's really hard to build that legacy of institutional knowledge in a firm and even in an industry, a specific legal industry, right? Corporate contracts, right? Or litigation or whatever it may be. Even litigation is gigantic. It's hard to do that unless you have people that stick around. So again, start somewhere, get expert advice, and don't worry about the end result. Just worry about making progress every quarter, every 6 months, every year. And then you're going to look back and say over 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, you're going to see how amazing a culture and a program that you've built.
Beautifully stated. So, for now, thank you so much, George, for all of that great insight and that great last piece of advice. Kind of makes me think of, as an artist, that first stroke with the paintbrush or the first chip at a block of marble for a sculpture.
That's right.
Just take it one step at a time. So we'd like to open it up now for some questions. So as you're typing your questions, we wanted to share some helpful resources with you all. If you visit our website, r3c.com/legal or r3c.com/toolbox, and I know we've got it down in the widget here at the bottom, you'll see the pop-up, our legal solutions. We've got some of them positioned there as well, but there's some great tools in there to kind of help you get started on that journey of improving well-being or strengthening the well-being programs that you already have within your organizations. And our ultimate goal is to help make tomorrow better than today. And we help law firms do that by helping you help your best be their best. So check out those resources. And of course, there's a contact us link on our website, but reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to help you on this journey, even if it's just a 15-minute consultation with George or one of our other subject matter experts to help kind of gauge and see what might be going on within the law firm and what we might recommend. So to get started, we do have a couple questions that have come in. So the first question is, we talked a little bit about measuring the results. So this question is coming about specifically measuring the results. What are some of the ways that R3 measures the results of a wellness program from a consultative perspective?
Certainly. So we start with breaking it down into two buckets, right? One is a little more angled towards clinical improvement. So again, depression, anxiety, sleep, eating habits, right? These are medical or clinical related issues that are kind of usually linked to some kind of clinical syndrome or clinical disorder that might prompt someone to go into the counseling side of it. We want those things to improve. So that's one bucket. The other is functional. How are you functioning? Are you getting out of bed on time? Are you engaging in physical activity? Do you feel you're able to contribute in group settings better than you used to in terms of feeling open, confident, able to speak? Is your collaboration more welcoming and open and free as opposed to restrictive and defensive and even hostile? And there's a ton of other functional measures that we could talk about, again, related to the culture. But we start with that. And then what we do, excuse me, is we build in those measures into the back end, and we encourage, this is the model that we're rolling out, and we encourage the coach and or the therapist to build in those measures. So not only is the coach, and again, a best practice approach here is the coach and the therapist are rating on those, but so is the individual receiving that service. And then what we can do is we crosswalk that data to ensure that, Jamie's my client and I'm the coach. Are my ratings about Jamie and Jamie's ratings about Jamie, are they generally in alignment? If they're not in alignment, that gives us other data points to figure out what's going on there. Why are they not in alignment? Many reasons that could be for that, right? Maybe I need to adjust my coaching approach, right? Maybe Jamie is not feeling comfortable to say, George, you're not helping me, but I don't want to hurt George's feelings, right? So that can be really useful feedback for us to make adjustments at the individual level and at the programmatic level. And then there's a third bucket, and that is what we call the organizational bucket. This is where, in an ideal methodology, we also want to get data from managers and leaders. And it's not just leaders. We might want to get data from the receptionist that handles all the scheduling for the legal professionals, right? We literally want data from the office. How is George doing? Or better yet, we're using Jamie in this example. How is Jamie doing across a number of these dimensions? And while we're doing all that, we're also training everyone in the organization that feedback is your friend. Because many of us have been in environments, I'd venture to say at some point, all of us have been in environments where feedback was your nemesis. Feedback was ugly. It was hostile. It wasn't from a place of care. It wasn't from a place of growth, right? And it shamed us or it made us feel belittled. Feedback is your friend in the right culture. And once you can make that transformation over, people are craving feedback. They want it because they're in a growth mindset and they want to know, how am I doing so I can make adjustments and continue to do even better. So those are just top of mind. Those are some things that, we look at. Now, different clients will want to tweak that a little bit and look at it a little bit differently. But we use different, measures. We vendor with a company that actually has built-in app-driven measurements. So people can do ratings right on their iPhone or their Android. So there's different tech solutions that allow us to make good on those measures, but it's the measurement design that is important as well.
The other question that we had that came in was looking at hiring an organization to help with structuring a well-being program, or doing that consultative review of the program. What are our recommendations around how to choose the right partner for that journey?
Sure. The first question there's a few things. First, do they have experience doing this kind of thing? There are organizations, there are some EAPs that do have that experience. There are some EAPs that don't have that experience. So I would want you to dive into asking that would-be vendor, what is their background in doing this kind of work and doing this kind of consultation? The next step is, do you just want program design, right? Program consultation on how you redesign or the kinds of things you need to implement. So think of it like a shell or an outline or a blueprint, right? It's the difference between going to an architect and getting a blueprint or going to a builder that's actually going to build the house. So do you need an architect of the program? Some firms, that may be all you need. You have internal resources. You have a really robust EAP, or you have local counselors that you already engage with, or you have a performance coach already in-house, right? Or maybe even a chief well-being officer already in-house. Maybe you just need help with the blueprint. Many firms, however, also need help with the builder. They need someone that has done the work that can come in and help you implement the program from the development level all the way down to boots on the ground of delivering the services or partnering with you to deliver those services.
Right.
Yep.
Well, those are all the questions that we have. Thank you so much, George, for all your expertise.
My pleasure.
And again, insights, advice, all of this great information that you've provided for our audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, check out our r3c.com/legal for some great resources and solutions to help your law firms today. So thanks again, everybody. Make it a great day. We'll catch you on the next webinar.